Welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Basketball Weekly Planner. I am Amber Wilson, and joining me, of course, the senior fantasy writer, Jamey Eisenberg. And Jamey, we don't normally talk about regular season games here, but when Charlotte beats Boston, we've got to discuss it, and fantasy owners need to be aware that there's some Bobcats out there playing really well.
Yeah, Amber, they really are playing well. It's pretty impressive the way these guys have stepped up as of late, especially three guys for the Bobcats when you're talking about Gerald Wallace, Jason Richardson, and Nazr Mohammed. You know, three guys who, two of the guys you really would expect to be playing well at this point in the season. Gerald Wallace, he fills up the stat sheet, does everything in terms of points, rebounds, blocks, steals. He's one of the most athletic forwards in the NBA and really playing well. Jason Richardson has really made the transition from Golden State to Charlotte very smoothly. His scoring is finally up to where you would expect it to be. And then Nazr Mohammed, Amber, is really the interesting one because since coming to Charlotte from the trade from Detroit, he's really played well and has really stepped up his game and is really taking some minutes and production away from a guy like Emeka Okafor, you know, who's really struggled recently since the trade with Mohammed.
Right. So they're not all playing very well. Emeka Okafor struggling a little bit, so he is on your sit centers list this week, along with Big Z and Shaq. Jamey, Shaq's coming back, so why is he on this list?
Well, Amber, he's on the list simply because you got to see what you're going to get from Shaq before he's 100% healthy. So he's going to come back January 16th against Chicago, the Heat's first home game following a road trip here. So he's dealing with the hip injury, and I think you just got to give him some time before he gets back on the court to use him in your fantasy lineup. So keep him reserved. Maybe 2 weeks from now, we put him back in the lineup.
Those are your sit centers. Let's jump right into the thick of it. Let's move on to your start centers this week. We have Curry, Collison, and Camby. Camby has 4 games this week, which is probably a good reason why he's a start here.
That's right.
What about these other two guys?
Well, you know, Eddie Curry finally is starting to play well for the Knicks. You know, he had a great game against his former team in the Bulls. Finally, I think, starting to get the hang of playing with Zach Randolph, and I think you'll start to see the Knicks, now that Stephon Marbury is over some of his missing some time here, Jamal Crawford healthy, I think you're going to see the Knicks start to play a little bit well, at least from a fantasy perspective, and that's a good thing for Curry. And then when it comes to Nick Collison, Amber, he's just playing out of his mind right now. Chris Wilcox, starting forward for the Sonics, is missing time with a finger injury, so you're starting to see Nick Collison really step up with his rebounding, starting to play like he did last year when he was a very quality fantasy center.
All right, and let's move on to our starting forwards. Let's start off with Josh Howard. Then we have Josh Boone, who is now forward or center eligible, and Luol Deng. Why is he a start here since he's missed a few games?
Yeah, unlike Shaq, Luol Deng is probably going to be back to start this week as well, but a guy you want to get into your lineup as opposed to Shaquille O'Neal, just because Luol Deng kind of just resting a little bit, making sure the Achilles injury, the Achilles tendonitis that's bothered him of late is going to be 100% healthy. I think you'll see him this weekend, and then coming into next week, he'll be able to get into your fantasy lineup, so you definitely want to start him.
Okay, let's move on to your sit forwards list this week. Let's throw those names at you. I'll let you read them since I'm stumbling over my words here, but Peja Stojakovic is on this list. He's usually a start when he's healthy. Jamey, why is he up here?
He's up here for a couple reasons. One, only 2 games this fantasy scoring period, so I don't think you're going to get the type of production in leagues where it's cumulative. Maybe some average leagues you want to start him, but I just think Page is one of those guys up and down. Now that David West is back healthy for the Hornets, Chris Paul is playing great. You know, Page is still going to get his points, going to shoot from the outside, but that's really all you're going to get. When you only get 2 games for a guy like him, I think you want to keep him reserved. Same thing with Jermaine O'Neal dealing with an injury, so you want to keep him out as well until he's 100% healthy.
Okay, let's move on to your starting guards this week. And Mo Williams is on this list. He's been playing really well recently, Jamey. Is there any reason for that?
There is a reason for that, Amber, and that's because Michael Redd has been dealing with a thigh injury. As long as Redd is out, Williams is going to pick up some of the scoring slack for the Bucks. Andrew Bogut also playing well for Milwaukee, but I think Mo Williams has really stepped up his game, finally living up to the big contract that he signed in Milwaukee this offseason.
All right, and your sit guards this week, Mike Dunleavy, Bonzi Wells, and Carlos Arroyo. Wells and Arroyo, they're 2 guys that we've talked a lot about recently. Why are they sits?
Well, Amber, the reason that they're sits is simply because both guys have really struggled the last 4 or 5 games for their respective teams. Bonzi Wells, has really played well with Tracy McGrady out, but I think you're going to see McGrady come back before next week's scoring period starts. So I think you're going to want to keep Wells reserved just because, again, McGrady's going to steal all of that production. And then when it comes to Carlos Arroyo, he was the starting point guard for about 3 games for the Magic. Jameer Nelson was moved to the bench. We saw Nelson really start to pick up his game. I think maybe he got the hint from Stan Van Gundy that if you go to the bench, you got to play well, which means that Arroyo goes back to the bench now. Don't start Arroyo. Don't start Wells. Start the other guys we mentioned because those guys will help your fantasy team.
All right, Jamey, thanks for all of your advice and analysis. I'm sure these guys are hanging on to every word of it.
Let's hope so.
That'll do it for us for now. Keep your mouse right here at CBSSports.com for everything you need to know in the world of sports. And if you missed anything here today, you know the drill. Stop, refresh, and rewatch. For Jamey Eisenberg, I'm Amber Wilson, and good luck with your life.